Hi, I'm Louise Wood and I co-lead the NIHR, and I'm really delighted to be supporting the UK's first Dementia Researcher Careers Festival.
To be successful nowadays in science, you need diversity. You need people from all kinds of walks of life.
We know that for every scientist working in dementia research, there are 4 scientists working in cancer research.
We want to supercharge the next generation of scientists to make the much-needed breakthroughs in both the understanding and intervention in the diseases that cause dementia.
And we have no treatments. We have treatments for cancer, we have treatments for heart disease, but we don't have treatments for the undignified death of dementia.
So nowadays you need chemists, biologists, mathematicians, bioinformaticians, medical doctors, psychologists.
So please think seriously about how you can bring your talents and insights into tackling this awful disease.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Dementia Research Careers webinar on careers in technology, data and innovation. I'm Penny Moyle. I'm the CEO of Race Against Dementia. Race Against Dementia is a charity that provides grants to support early career researchers and also gives them a program of developmental opportunities inspired by best practice in Formula One and other high-tech enterprises. We want to supercharge the next generation of dementia researchers. You've just heard in that video, for every dementia researcher, there are 4 cancer researchers. So we really need more people to join the Race Against Dementia, and we need them all to be punching well above their weight. This particular session is being delivered as a part of the Dementia Research Careers Festival. For more information, you can go to www.dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk/careers. But I'm guessing you probably found that website already if you found your way here. Do go back to it because there's a lot of resources and information there as well. We've got lined up for you today 3 fantastic speakers, each working in a different area of dementia research and each having come to dementia research via a quite unique path. As you've just heard, dementia is an enormous global challenge. 1 in 3 people born today are going to die with dementia unless we do something to change that. It's going to need the kind of focus that we had to get a man on the moon in the 1960s, and that we've seen create massive progress in cancer research in recent decades, or even the kind of focus we've had that's helping us through the current COVID crisis. This is a more complex problem than any of those, but together we can make a difference in our own lifetimes. Before we move to the speakers, I'd just like to remind the audience, if you're in YouTube and on Zoom, you can post questions at any time using the Q&A and the comment section on your screen. If you say that you want your question directed to a specific person, please note that in the question as you write it, and we'll make sure we get the right person to answer you. The format for today, though, is we're going to hear from each of our speakers, and then we're going to save the questions till the end. So do hang around for that part and don't feel that we've skipped over your questions if we haven't answered them immediately. So our first speaker today is Sarah Marzi. I hope her camera's now come on. Brilliant. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Sarah's with the UK Dementia Research Institute at Imperial College in London. She was initially a mathematician and psychologist, but moved to dementia research for her PhD at King's College in London. And her work is on the epigenetic regulation in neurodegenerative disease. I can nearly pronounce it. Hopefully by the time you've heard Sarah speak, we'll know much more about what that's all about. Thanks, Sarah. Look forward to hearing it.
Thanks so much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here today and tell you a bit about how my passion for dementia research started and how I got into this field. So yeah, I work at Imperial College London, and what I study really is epigenetics. And if you haven't heard of it, so the simple picture is epigenetics are all the biochemical mechanisms that regulate your gene expression. So all the cells in your body have DNA, and DNA produces RNA and proteins. proteins being sort of the functional units and building blocks of your cells. And epigenetics is the machinery that regulates what protein is expressed in which cell, when, how much of it, and all of those things. So the thing that really illustrates this quite nicely, I think, is if you think about the human body is made out of very, very different organs, tissues, and cell types that make up these organs. And they have really specialized functions. So you could think about a neuron in the brain sending electrical signals, or maybe a skin cell that looks completely different, that has different functions, different proteins, which come from different genes that are expressed. And so all of that is regulated by the epigenome. And the term was originally coined from developmental science. So where you think about going from an embryonic stem cell, a pluripotent stem cell that can become anything, and that sort of differentiates sequentially to become ever more specialized. So practically, there are three types of mechanisms that fulfill this role. And basically, you can have chemical modifications right on the DNA itself. Often this will be the addition of a methyl group, methylation on the DNA. You can have modifications to histone proteins. So the DNA in the nucleus is wound up around these histone proteins, and they have some amino acid tails coming out of them. And all of these amino acids can be modified as well. And then you have non-coding RNAs, so RNAs that don't produce any proteins, but they can have regulatory roles. And these kinds of things is what I study. And why do I study it? And why do I think it's interesting in dementia? So just very brief introduction. So obviously we know what happens in dementia. Here in this case, in Alzheimer's disease, the most common cause of dementia, you get a vast neurodegeneration, so a loss of the neurons across your cortex, and this is what a normal brain would look like compared to an Alzheimer's brain. You see that you really lose a lot of the mass around your cortical outer layer. And we also know a little bit of what happens at the cellular level. So specifically in Alzheimer's disease, you get an accumulation of two proteins that start to misfold. And one of them is amyloid beta, and it forms these plaques that are between the neurons, and the other one is tau protein, which becomes hyperphosphorylated and builds tangles within the neurons. But we don't really know what causes it. So why do some people develop these protein aggregations, and why do they get neurodegeneration and others don't? And so the main two drivers of this at the very origin that we think of are genetic risk factors and environmental risk factors. And my main motivation for studying the epigenome is really understanding what these environmental and these genetic risk factors do. So on the environmental end, for example, lifestyle factors such as nutrition, obesity, but also medication, exercise, those kinds of things can affect your long-term risk for various diseases, actually. But we also know that they alter the epigenome. So it's speculated that the epigenome is the way through which they act on the diseases. And similarly, we know increasingly that there is quite a lot of genetic contribution to these diseases, but often these variants have very, very small effect sizes, and they don't actually alter the composition of a given protein, but rather they are found in these what we call regulatory regions, so regions that affect how much of a protein is produced, whether it's produced, when, and where. But taking a step back, how did I even get into this? So I started out actually as a mathematician, and I was really going all the way pure maths in the very beginning. That was my absolute passion, doing things like geometry, algebra. But sort of towards the end of my degree, realized actually I'd love to apply this kind of quantitative stuff to research questions, natural research questions, something that really interests me. And so actually towards the end of it, I specialized more towards statistics, applied statistics, epidemiology. And sort of in parallel for the last 3 years of my degree, I also undertook an undergrad in psychology, because I was always really interested in how does the brain work? How do we think? What goes wrong in diseases? And so combining these two together, and especially for understanding the biological origins of disease, I moved into epigenetics during my PhD and postdoc. So trying to link epigenetic regulation with environmental stressors, but also with what happens in neurodegenerative disease. This is also the first time I sort of ventured out into the lab and actually got to do experiments, and I had to do a lot of programming actually, because data analysis is a huge part of the work that I do. And all of this together has sort of led me to where I am now. I started my research group just over a year ago at Imperial College, and I do what I would call data science, which combines maths and programming with the content-specific knowledge from molecular biology, from psychology, psychiatry, neuroscience, to really understand the drivers of these diseases. Now, this sounds really like it makes a lot of sense how I got there, and it was really planned out, but it certainly wasn't. There were many diversions in different directions that I took along the way. So as I said initially, I thought pure maths was the best thing ever. There was a part where I thought I wanted to go into finance and make a lot of money, but then I realized I really didn't intrinsically love the kind of work that you would do. So I did a couple of internships and realized it wasn't for me. I wanted to work on something that I'm really passionate about. And to me, the brain and the diseases of the brain are really that. And that's how I moved towards that field. So just to say, you don't have to have it all planned out right from the start. I also moved around a bit geographically. So I'm originally from Germany, from Bonn, went to the south to Freiburg to study, spent some time in Rome as well, which was really nice, and have been in London since starting my PhD in 2013. So I sort of got stuck here, and I like it, I love it, and hopefully will remain at Imperial College long term. So just a bit about specifics of studies that I've worked on. So as I said, I want to understand what happens with the epigenetics in diseases. So I undertook the largest study of a certain modification, the histone acetylation in Alzheimer's disease. So you take brain samples from people with Alzheimer's disease and from controls, and you basically compare whether the differences in this histone modification. And you do it with a technique called chromatin immunoprecipitation. So you basically fish out fragments of DNA that have a lot of this acetylation mark. And in general, if you have a lot of this acetylation, it means the target gene will be upregulated. So there will be a lot of expression of that gene. But what I really wanted to illustrate with this is how my maths and quantitative skills came into it, more so than the actual results. So the results were, there are lots and lots of acetylation differences, and they link to really interesting genes that are already known to have functions in the disease. But the challenges of actually dealing with this data really brought in my maths background a lot. So first, we were the first people to do a genome-wide quantitative study of this kind of histone modification. So there are lots of questions about how do I even start to analyze my data? What do I need to be careful about? What are potential biases? What are the statistical models I need to use? I need to write new code. I need to find existing software and code and integrate it. And for all of that, sort of the quantitative side of skills was so essential. And then, as I said, we profile these histone modifications across the whole genome, and the genome is really, really, really big. So you get this really big data. You get hundreds of thousands of locations where you have epigenetic modifications. How do you then analyze it? You can't, well, just open it in an Excel sheet. So you need to do it with clever code, and you need to also take into account things like multiple testing. So if you test a million things, some of them will be positive just by chance, and you need to account for all that. And there the statistics comes in and is really helpful. And another epidemiological question is actually, what is cause and effect? If I observe differences in an Alzheimer brain, does that mean that these differences cause the disease, or is it a downstream consequence of the disease? And there are some statistical things you can do about that. And one of the things you can do, for example, is you can integrate with existing information from other layers. So like genetic risk factors, gene expression risk factors. And the beauty of genetic risk factors is that they always come in the beginning. So your genome is basically set at conception, or at birth, if you will, and it doesn't change anymore. So if you have a genetic risk factor, you know it must come upstream of the disease. So by linking epigenetic factors with genetic factors, you can sort of infer some amount of causality. And one of the things we were able to show here quite nicely was that these regulatory domains, the regions that have acetylation, actually carry more of the genetic risk than the rest of the genome, so that these regulatory elements are really important in driving the genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. And we were the first to show this. Then just really briefly, all of this has been done on bulk brain samples. So the brain, as you may know, contains many, many different cell types, different types of neurons, and lots of glia cells that support the neurons, like the microglia, oligodendrocytes, and astrocytes. And when you just look at the bulk brain, it's sort of all mushed together and you get an average signal of all of that. And if you get differences in cell type proportion, so for example, Alzheimer's patients tend to have fewer neurons than people without Alzheimer's, that might affect the epigenetic profile that you see. And so one thing I've been working on, again, an example of using sort of the programming and the stat skills, is a method to actually deconvolute bulk signals. So to take the bulk signal, annotate it with what we know where the cell type specific signals would happen, and then you can deconvolute it into its cell type specific constituent parts, and just based on the bulk epigenome profile, you can actually estimate the proportion of each of these cell types in your bulk sample, which is quite nice. And so this is a method I am currently working on actually still, and we've made this into a software package that we can then share and publish with a paper. And I think the beauty of that is that anybody can then go ahead and download it and use it for their own data. So one thing I really love about the field I work in is that there's a lot of open science and sharing of methods, of analyses, of data, and of software. So that's really great. And then just to finish off, an impression of a day in the life. And of course, this is a lie. I don't do all of this in one day. This is more like several years in the life of Sarah Marzi as a researcher. So most of the time, my day will look a lot like this. I spend a lot of time coding and analyzing data. Now that I lead a group, there's a lot of writing and administration things, applying for money and all of that as well. But in the earlier stages, so during the PhD and the postdoc, it's a lot more research. And for me, most of research means analysis and computational research. I do occasionally pop into the lab and do some things. Conferences are another really nice thing, disseminating your research to others, presenting, for example, posters, organizing conferences sometimes can be fun too. Lots of team meetings these days, more on Zoom than anywhere else, because we're not yet back in person. And then teaching as well is something that I really enjoy. And I've done lots of stats teaching actually, which people find really useful in medical schools and within biology, where maybe from the background and the degree, people haven't learned as much stats yet. So I've been developing some stats courses for people in the medical faculty at Imperial as well, and I really enjoy that as well. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions later on.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah. That was really good. And I look forward to picking up on some questions later. I have a couple up my sleeve for you as well. So thank you very much. And now I will turn to our second speaker, Matt Harrison. So hopefully Matt can turn his camera on for us. We can see that he's really here with us. So Matt's a designer at the Helix Centre, also at Imperial College London, but a very different part of Imperial College. His early career was in healthcare, but he moved into this design after caring for his father, who had early onset vascular dementia, which must have been quite a life-changing experience for you in several dimensions, I'm sure. But now you're working in design in healthcare, which you've described as being both frustrating and extremely rewarding. I thought that was a very interesting way of describing the balance there, but clearly you get some great satisfaction about having an impact on people's lives through that work. So I will leave you to tell us all about it. Thanks very much, Matt.
Super, thank you, Penny. I'll just share my screen. Is that working okay? Can you see my slide? Yes, so my name's Matthew Harrison. I'm a designer. As Penny said, I work in the Helix Centre, which is at Imperial College. And within that role, I now work full-time within the UK DRI Care Research and Technology Centre. So the UK DRI has, I think, 6 centres in total, 2 of which are at Imperial. And so this is the other one to Sarah. And unlike the other 5 centres who are primarily interested in understanding the biology and chemistry of dementia and finding treatments and cures, our centre is primarily focused in how people live with dementia and how we care for people with dementia. So we're looking at the lived experience now and how we make that life with dementia as good as possible, and how we do things like help keep people in their home for as long as they want to be, and of course how we support carers and things like that. So as this is about careers, I thought I'd start with just a very quick overview of how I got here. I started as doing undergraduate in engineering. You'll notice I've been in London in the southeast of England most of my life, so not quite as exotic as Sarah. I started in engineering, found that while I was doing that, I was interested in how things worked, but I got more interested in how we as people and society relate to the things that we use, and got drawn towards design. And so did a postgrad at the Royal College of Art, which is just next door to Imperial in South Kensington. Then worked in a research centre, the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design at the Royal College of Art, and had my own consultancy for a little while before coming back to Imperial to join the Helix Centre, which I'll touch on in a second. And for the last couple of years or so, within that Helix Centre role, I've been part of the DRI Centre. And along the bottom, you can see some of the things that I've worked on along the way, from student projects, simple things, flip-flops and shoes. This is a project looking at helping older people access internet technologies back when the internet was a bit younger. Creating surgical simulations as a consultant, again with Imperial College. First touched on designing with dementia in a Living Well with Dementia challenge run by the Design Council, where we looked at ways for families to help look after people and coordinate the caring of someone with dementia, which is surprisingly close to what we're doing now, although it was far more simple in those days. This is a project that has been a big part of my time at Helix Centre, looking at how we provide, how we manage clinical tasks within a hospital. So how different patients are looked after by doctors throughout the hospital. This is my dad in the middle. There was a bit of a sort of a shock in my life, in that I became the carer for my dad, as Penny said, with dementia, and I was able to keep working, but it was a major part of my life, and I learned a lot about at least one experience of dementia, and could see the value of using technology to help with situations like ours. He lived at home alone, and I was visiting him a lot, and helping him through it. And so when the opportunity came up within my role to join the DRI Care and Research Technology Centre, I jumped at it, having seen the potential for what we could do and the importance and value of it. The Helix Centre, very quickly, is fairly unique. It's about bringing design to the intersection with science and engineering from Imperial College, and embedding it in an NHS trust. So we're based most of the time in the middle of Imperial College, in St Mary's Hospital in Paddington in London. So we're right in the thick of it, where healthcare is delivered, and right in the centre, next to where Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. We have this glass box. It's our design studio, where we can bring healthcare professionals from the hospital, we can bring patients, we can bring the public to come and work with us on our projects. And really, that's what design's all about. It's about drawing on different experiences and bringing people together. And our projects cover a range of things, from in hospital to how we deliver healthcare out in the community, which is a large part of what we're doing in the Dementia Institute. And how people are looked after at home. So the centre, the Care Research and Technology Centre, it's based at Imperial. It's also with the University of Surrey and Surrey and Borders NHS Trust. We're looking at how to empower people with dementia and their caregivers by using a friendly, healthy homes or smart home intelligent environment that transforms and personalizes care. And what that looks like in a sort of big center overview kind of way is that there's a whole bunch of very varied different scientists and engineers in these different streams concentrating on different parts of technology. So we've got electrical engineers creating sensors for the home to track behavior around the home. We've got synthetic biologists coming up with new at-home diagnostics. So this is more to do with things like detecting urinary tract infections rather than dementia itself. But UTI is a very important part of keeping people out of hospital. We've got robotics specialists looking at how we can, at the moment, how we can use things like Alexa to help people manage their day and stay, in control of their daily life at home. The whole stream based at University of Surrey of trying to understand the relationship between sleep and dementia. And then there's the behavior and cognition aspect led by Dave Sharp and other clinicians looking at how trying to understand and manage some of the behaviors that change with dementia, and understand really how that is affected by the home environment. And then in the middle, across all of that, there's this technology platform that links together all the research and the homes of the people that are participating in this study. And then there's the sort of a human-centered design approach, which is my role of making all of those different parts of the center accessible and palatable to participants, I suppose. So it looks like this. It looks, it looks like this. There's a whole bunch of houses out there. A lot of them are in Surrey at the moment with our devices and some off-the-shelf devices in. There's a clinical dashboard, a monitoring team of people reading the data, understanding the data, and talking to the people at home to help manage the dementia and manage the daily lives. And then there's a research aspect where we're trying to learn from it and learn from the data. And some of the things we're trying to do with this platform is help detect infection or prevent falls, so trying to reduce hospitalization, identify agitation, understand sleep, perhaps understand the effects of changes of medication on people's daily lives, and improve care resilience so people can stay at home for longer. But design is about making sure, marrying the needs of the technologies we're developing with the experiences and aspirations of people at home. So there are two sort of things we do as designers. We spend time with people in their homes, in their workplaces, learning about their lives, learning about what they need and want from our services and products as we make them. And we give those people a voice in the development of those technologies so that they answer those needs. And we do that, first of all, by understanding what they want and what the problem is, and then making prototypes. And these can be very, very cheap and dirty prototypes to test and visualize ideas. We talk about iterating quickly and failing early. So we make sample apps and products and devices and things and show them to people and get feedback. And it's a very iterative process. These are some of the little insights I've got from visiting the homes of people with dementia during this study, just some of the ways they relate to the technology that we use. So little things that give us a clue as to what life is like and what the needs of people are on a day-to-day basis. So, this is someone who uses an Alexa at the moment, but to help their memory, they have a little cheat card to remind them what they can ask the Alexa of. And, with just these little things, it makes that whole technology useful and accessible to them. We asked people to take measurements as part of the research study with internet-connected devices. But it's always interesting, the number of people that are also writing down the data for their own use, and so they can take the data to the GP appointments, was also interesting and surprising. So we're looking at ways to marry the two experiences. We want the data, but so do the people at home. And then this is a daughter who set up a system for her mother to help her stay hydrated, very rudimentary, but she had a series of bottles with day markings on to help her mother with dementia make sure she's drinking enough fluid. So just little examples of the human insights that we try and find. These are some of the devices as a designer I'm working with different teams across the centre. So off-the-shelf devices like thermometers and pulse oximeters to help monitor people's health been really important during COVID, as we've been able to help monitor people for signs of infection early. Alexa I mentioned, but also some remote online cognitive testing so that we can see how people's cognition is changing. And then brand new devices coming out of the engineering labs that are maybe things that sit inside the ear to measure different physiological measurements, and radars to track behavior around the house while respecting privacy. And then the technology platform across the middle of it, and this is a very important part of my work. This is a clinical dashboard, what the monitoring teams see of the people at home, and this really affects the relationship between the participants in the study and the researchers and the clinicians that are looking after them. So how do we display the data? When do we bring up alerts and things like that to encourage or to provoke an interaction between the researchers and the participants at home? And then on the right-hand side, this is a design for a carer's companion app that would sit on a tablet or a smartphone. And in some cases, the person with dementia themselves might use it, but it shows them the data that's coming from their home and makes it useful to them, shows them who's on the system, gives them reminders and an observation diary to help input information into the wider study. So it's really varied and interesting work. I mean, this Venn diagram is used quite a lot in design and innovation. And it aims to show the balance of what we're trying to achieve through design and innovation processes. So we're looking for a mixture of, or a hot spot between technological feasibility and sort of business viability, if you like, and then desirability. How acceptable is a technology to the end user, and do they want to have it? Does it give them a positive experience and tell them something useful? Is it easy to access for lots of different people? And then, so we're trying to balance those three elements for different stakeholders within the project, whether it's researchers interested in how things are going to work, to the research participants, making sure they have a good experience, and then having in mind, that where this technology is going in the future, that it's going to be used by health and social care services, and it's going to be used by patients eventually. So, a lot of balancing different needs and wants, and trying to find the right sort of compromise for the whole package, if you see what I mean. So just to finish up, I mean, highlights of my role and how I ended up here and what I love about it. Firstly, is I get to work with as you've seen, a wide variety of different disciplines and technologies, and it takes a little while for a designer to get into some of the clinical terminology and ways of working, but it's really exciting and rewarding when you do. I'm mostly driven by getting to know people's real lives, getting to understand what their daily lives are, and I have that personal experience that I draw on as well, but also have that motivation of seeing how this kind of technology and this kind of research can have a big impact on people's lives. But it's really nice to be able to get to know people at a personal level and represent what they want and think from within research. And then I get to do it, using creative skills, using imagination, coming up with ideas, testing them, making things, and it's really good fun. It's really interesting. So, I mean, I was very squeamish at school. I shunned biology. I couldn't hack anything medicine related, but I've ended up working in healthcare, purely by chance. And as well with dementia, I recognise the squiggly line that Sarah showed earlier, but I'm very, very happy to have ended up here. So it's a great role. So thank you very much. I'll stop my video.
Just start mine. Thanks very much, Matt, for a really interesting talk about a completely different way of contributing to the whole dementia puzzle with a different aspect of science. I loved your comment at the end there, Matt, about when you were at school that you're a bit squeamish and biology and all of that didn't really appeal to you at all, and you wouldn't have imagined you would have ended up in healthcare, but actually via a different squiggly route that is where you found yourself, and it sounds like you're doing fantastic work and really enjoying it and find it very rewarding. So brilliant story to hear. So I'd now like to move to our third speaker for today, Riona McArdle, who is a postdoc research associate at Newcastle University. Hi, Riona.
Hi.
So I understand Riona manages the World Young Leaders in Dementia blog, and also as a regional co-lead for the Demon Network. So clearly from your research base, using that to sort of network out and connect with people around the world. But your own research is on applications of wearable tech and gait analysis for both dementia diagnosis and for care. So I'm looking forward to hearing all about that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Penny. I'm just going to share my screen now. Let's see how that gets up. Okay, I hope that's okay and everyone can see it all right. So thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you very much for the attendees for coming and listening to our talks today. As Penny said, my name is Riona McArdle, and today I'm going to talk to you about my work looking at digital markers for dementia diagnosis and care. So I'm just going to briefly outline who I am and tell you about my research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got to my current position and what I think are the most important lessons that I learnt on my career journey. So right now, I'm a research associate at Newcastle University. I work between two different research groups, the Brain and Movement Research Group, who focus on the development, validation, and implementation of digital mobility tools like wearable technology for clinical practice in a range of different age-related conditions, including dementia. And I also work for the Global Health Research Group for Dementia Prevention and Enhanced Care, where I'm looking at the feasibility and effectiveness of diagnostic tools for dementia in low to middle income countries. My background is actually in applied neuropsychology, and I have a real interest and aspiration to improve how we diagnose and care for people with dementia. And I think that digital technology can lead us on the path to success for this. My most important research contribution to date was finding that different types of dementia have unique signatures of gait impairment. So that means that they walk in a different way from each other. And this finding could help clinicians better differentiate them during diagnosis. That was an important finding because the two most common types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body disease, often look very clinically similar, but in fact, they require different treatment and management. And that means that if we incorrectly diagnose them, this could have a negative impact on their care. So at the moment, Lewy body disease is underdiagnosed and often misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's disease. So simple and inexpensive markers, such as a walking test, could have a positive impact on diagnostic practice and therefore improve the lives of people with dementia. So where does technology come in? Well, using a small wearable device containing movement sensors, I can continuously and remotely monitor people's gait, both in a clinic and also out in the real world. I validated this approach in people with different types of dementia, and I found that it might be the most useful way. I found that it may be a useful way for differentiating dementia subtypes and for tracking disease progression following diagnosis. So for example, if we continuously monitor a person's mobility in the real world, we might get better insight into how they're reacting to medication or behavioral interventions, how their cognition is changing over time during their disease progress, and find other ways of identifying onset of behavioral changes, such that we might see in dementia. Continuously monitoring mobility is not the only way that we can use digital technology to support earlier and more accurate diagnosis of dementia and personalize the way that we care for people with dementia. There are a number of other projects and initiatives going on all around the world that are looking at a range of everyday behaviors that we can monitor for this purpose, such as our sleep, our mood, our fatigue, our speech, even down to the keystrokes on our phone or on our laptop. Researchers are becoming increasingly more interested in these digital markers, these simple everyday activities that can be captured by technology and can act as a digital fingerprint for our health and cognition. And we hope that this might be able to help us detect dementia at a much earlier stage. So now that you know what I do, let's talk a little bit about how I got there. Well, I did my undergraduate in psychology in Ireland at Maynooth University. And that's where I discovered my interest in neuroscience and neuropsychology. And subsequently, I took every optional module that there was that focused on the brain and what happens to people when something goes wrong in the brain, such as neurological disorders like dementia. With my interest in neurological disorders now determined, I went on to do my MSc in Foundations of Clinical Neuropsychology at Bangor University in Wales. And that was a really amazing course for me. One particular highlight was a behavioural neurology module, where we would learn about neurological disorders such as dementia, Huntington's disease, or Broca's aphasia. And then we would meet people with those conditions and interview them. And that really allowed me to see the reality of neurological conditions and not just the textbook definition. At Bangor, my research project focused on developing a cognitive-based intervention for motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease. And that showed me that I wanted to do research directly with people with a neurological condition, and that I wanted to help them somehow with that research. So luckily, I was accepted into my PhD at Newcastle University, which is part of the Alzheimer's Society Doctoral Training Centre. This PhD focused on the use of gait analysis as a diagnostic marker for dementia. And as part of that PhD, I got to work directly with people with all different kinds of dementia. And I really loved that kind of interaction. I got to hear so many stories about their lives and get to know them as people. And it really made me engage with the purpose of the work and made me want to be a better researcher. I then went on to be a research associate within the same team, looking at digital mobility outcomes to detect how well a drug for Parkinson's disease is helping their movement problems. I was then awarded funding by the NIHR to carry out a part-time placement within the Global Health Research Group on Dementia Prevention and Enhanced Care, where I'm now developing some new skills in qualitative research, and I'm learning how I can translate my own research into the benefit of people with dementia in low to middle income countries. So that sounds like a nice linear picture, but what it doesn't do is highlight where things went wrong along the way. I just wanted to bring this up to show you a real picture of this kind of career journey and remind you that if you just keep trying, things do tend to work out in the end. After my undergraduate degree, I wasn't accepted into my #1 choice of masters at Edinburgh University, but that was okay because I absolutely loved my master's degree at Bangor. And I don't know if I would have gotten the same experience of getting to know people with neurological conditions if I had made it to Edinburgh. Before my PhD at Newcastle, I was rejected from a PhD at Edinburgh University, looking at multiple systems atrophy. But again, I think this worked out better for me because I really loved my PhD at Newcastle. I have a real personal interest in helping people with dementia. And most of all, I learned from the mistakes that I made making my application to Edinburgh. And I really gave a strong application for my Newcastle position. After my PhD, I was unsuccessful at getting a position as a faculty fellow at Newcastle University. These are one-year positions that protect your time to write external fellowships. So instead, I took on a job as a research associate on the drug trial in Parkinson's that I mentioned. I actually think that worked out better for me because the time away from my PhD research ideas allowed me to better develop new ideas, draw on the work that I learned in my postdoc, and also gave me the opportunity to develop collaborations with researchers outside of Newcastle, such as in Auckland and New Zealand, in Australia, in Norway, and in other research universities all around the UK. I also made it to the very last round for the Sir Henry Wellcome postdoctoral fellowship, which would have allowed me to become a more independent researcher and begin to lead my own work. But unfortunately, I was unsuccessful at that final stage. However, the feedback that I received has really strengthened my position. It gave me time for me to start my placement in the Global Health Research team and learn these new research skills, and it has allowed me to write an even stronger application for a subsequent fellowship. So, as I say, there is a lot of knocks, but with each one you learn something new. And there's a quote from Marcus Aurelius that I think is apt here, which says the impediment to action advances action, which basically means sometimes the thing that seems to be stopping us is simply taking us into a new direction that has a better outcome. With that said, I was always very aware of why I was pursuing this career path. And there's two main reasons. Number one, being a researcher gives you the opportunity to treat every day as a school day, which means I'm always learning, I'm always developing, and I have the flexibility to pursue my interests and develop research studies to look further into them. Secondly, my Nana Bella lived with Alzheimer's disease. She died when I was 18, And at that time, I didn't really understand what dementia was. So when I went into my master's, I knew that I wanted to know more about dementia, and having this opportunity to study it and actually become a dementia researcher has been really wonderful for me. When I think about why I'm doing what I'm doing, I always think about my nana. At the time she had dementia, there was a lot of stigma about the condition, and there wasn't a lot of knowledge about what to do. At least that's where it seemed like where we lived. And so I want to be able to help people like my nana live as independently and as well as they can after their diagnosis. And I believe that we can do this by improving how we diagnose people, diagnosing them earlier, and providing better care from that point on. But we can only do that if we work together. One of my favorite things about dementia research is that there is something for everyone. I have a psychology background, but I did my PhD in movement analysis, and now I work within digital technology. And that's not an obvious path I would have seen for myself during my undergraduate. Every day I work with people of different disciplines, medics, social scientists, engineers, physios, and other allied health professionals, people with dementia and their families. Everyone's ideas has a place in dementia research, because by speaking about your ideas to people with all different disciplines, they can develop into something really impactful for the lives of people with dementia and could really improve things for them. So if you're thinking about a career in dementia research, no matter what background you are, there will be a place for you. I'm just going to end my talk with 3 of the main lessons that I learned that I think might be helpful if you're becoming a successful dementia researcher. First of all, be a 3D researcher. That means that while you're sitting at your desk and doing research, that's great, but also get involved in other things. Speak at events, involve people with dementia in how you plan your research and engage them in your findings at every turn. Collaborate with people from networks like Dementia Researcher, the Demon Network, and World Young Leaders in Dementia. Share your ideas. Get involved in organizations outside of the university and plan events. You can even do theatre performances about dementia if that's your thing. There's loads of opportunities out there and they all help. For me, I find that talking and talking and talking everywhere to everyone about my research really got a conversation going. It allowed me to get feedback from people with dementia and clinicians about what I do. And it also got gait on the radar for when people were developing new diagnostic criteria for prodromal Lewy body disease. It also gave me the opportunity to take part in podcasts like Dementia Researcher, to do radio and newspaper interviews, and to be on the BBC. And that makes my job a lot more fun for me. Secondly, and this is an easy one, if you're interested and passionate about something, pursue it. My motivation comes from genuinely believing that what I do will help people. And that means I'm driven to follow this journey and work as hard as I can. So if you find an area of research that you're really interested in, that you love reading about and talking about, see if you can get involved. And finally, be resilient. As in any job, you will get knockbacks. And often in research, we need to be self-motivated to carry out our jobs. Just remember that everyone is in the same situation and celebrate the wins when you get them. It can be hard, but usually you can take something positive from a rejection or an unsuccessful application. And with that, you can learn and grow and become a better researcher. So instead of thinking that you can't do it, just remember that you can. Thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful, thank you so much. You can invite our panelists to put their cameras back on, and I think Adam's going to also join us for some Q&A. But you know, what a wonderful story about what might look like a straight line pathway from childhood to career success. Actually, comes via the bits that you might not notice or hear about, but are those important learning events of when things don't quite go the way you first planned. That was just a brilliant way of describing it there. So thank you so much for that. So I think it can be very daunting at the beginning of your career to think you're supposed to know exactly where you're heading and that there is a straight line and that you should be just picking it and following it. And even whilst it can look like that when you're looking at someone else's life, it's not anyone's lived experience, I don't think. So with that, I will hand over to Adam for the questions that have come in.
Thank you very much, Penny. And thank you everybody for watching us today. And Penny, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to host it, and more broadly as well to Race Against Dementia, of course, who you are the Chief Executive of, for their fantastic work in funding people like Sarah and Matt and who the people that you funded are particularly interested in the tech, and you're working with Formula One, and how some of that mentality in those industries have translated, which I think also as well, hopefully the people who are watching are inspired by that looking at dementia isn't just, you know, a single thing. It is such a broad spectrum of work, and there's so many opportunities to work with some passionate individuals such as yourself and Race Against Dementia. So thank you very much, and of course Sir Jackie for his patronage. Okay, so we'll go to the questions. We've got a question that I was sent in advance, actually, from somebody who said that they're currently working, they're currently doing coding work at university. They're studying technology and coding, and wanted to ask if they had to do a PhD. Is doing a PhD something that they have to do before they can follow into dementia research? Does anybody have a view on that one? Go on, Matt. Because of course, Matt, I didn't know when we were putting your bio on the website. I didn't know if it was doctor, but
no, it's not. So I've not got a PhD. So
you're the great example to show that you don't have to be. Perhaps I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you
no,
said.
Absolutely. I mean, I did do an MA in industrial design, but I even see that as a bit of a correction after my engineering, rather than it, you know, as a designer, I didn't need to sort of be at an MA level necessarily to come into this field. I mean, I am surrounded by people who do have PhDs and are academic in their career trajectory, but there are quite a few people in the centre too who have come from a more technical background and are contributing to the centre's work in a very valuable way. So I think you know, certainly in the field that we're in the technology side of research, there's plenty to do without having you know, a PhD. And I'm employed as a professional member of staff rather than academic member of staff, actually, within the centre. So there are other options, even if we're a minority.
So, because engineers wouldn't necessarily normally do the PhD route, would they? In academia, yeah.
Well, I guess broadly within the centre, there are engineers who are academic and have the PhD route, and you know, their main output is research. But there's also a level of sort of developers, particularly software developers and things that have come, I'd say, from different directions, or come from industry, and have a slightly different profile.
So for those that are listening, of course, there are various ways you can go down getting a PhD. Of course, you can go to places like the UK Dementia Research Institute website right now, which are specific labs have already found the funding to hire PhD candidates. And so you would go in there into kind of a ready-made PhD where the field of research has already been decided, although quite often there's usually some flexibility within that to make it your own. But you could always go down that route. So you could look at employers and universities that are already advertising for PhDs, or of course you can go to a university and get the funding yourself and apply via the various programs. I've seen quite a few advertised in this space in Southampton recently. So if we come across these, we usually list them on our website in the job section. So please do visit the job section on our website to have a look, and if a PhD is for you. We've also talked, there's a blog, somebody's written, I think Clarissa Glebel wrote a blog for us this week, which is on the website. And we talked a little bit about this in yesterday's webinar, about the opportunity to work and study at the same time. So that could be another way to do this, is to study a PhD or a master's part-time whilst you're also working and perhaps getting some hand-on experience in the field. There's next question is for Sarah. Which comes from Riona, who asks, how do you recommend one gains experience in coding or data analysis alongside non-lab research-based roles?
It's a tricky one. I would say gain it as early as possible and as much as possible, because it's one of the most important skills. And actually, I'm an example of, I could have done it much earlier. Actually, I was quite naive when I was in my maths degree. I was all about the pure maths, and I was like, applied, no, it's not for me. I don't want to learn coding. I don't think I'm good at it. But really only learned it when I was in my PhD then. And I've come to really love it since, because it is so powerful. We teach people hands-on by courses at university. So there are summer schools or shorter courses or longer term courses. I also host students for internships, master's students sometimes for their projects as well. And quite often they don't actually have any coding background, and we bring them in and we can bring them up to speed to get them to a decent level to actually do projects. So any kind of those opportunities where you can visit a lab that does this kind of stuff, and they can get you hands-on training into the kind of methods, coding things they use, that I think is going to be really, really valuable. And that will also show you whether you enjoy that, actually doing that kind of work. So we've had several surprises of like neuroscientists or people who've only worked in the lab before suddenly coming to love coding and wanting to do a computational PhD after that.
Coding seems to have become people's part-time study, particularly since lockdown. Am I right in thinking this, or is this just a...
Oh yeah.
So everybody got locked down and sent home and decided to do a literature review or look at the data that they'd all collected over the last years and never really had the time, because we get into this mode of data collection and then we just want more and more data, and actually don't necessarily pursue or fully look at everything you've captured before and all the different angles. And so suddenly coding and looking at data seems to have been a big trend in the last year. I know, Penny, I've heard you talk before about your research fellows having gone back to look at their data, and Ree, I'm guessing you were out of the lab, so is that something you've done as well?
I've gone back through all my PhD data. I think every scrap of it is going to be published within the next year or two. And I also am doing about 5 literature reviews. Coding
skills are absolutely invaluable. And I know from the places I've worked before, when you find a good data analyst who has great coding skills in dementia research, these people, those careers and those people are invaluable and absolutely worth their weight in gold. And if that sounds like you and you're willing to bring your talents to dementia research, honestly, once you find your way in there, they won't let you go, because they're so needed and essential. Thank you very much for that question, Riona, and I hope that answered you. We've got another question which came through on YouTube, which was somebody asking, so I think it was about whether wearable technologies are something particularly, I guess, Reem, this might be a question for you and Matt, perhaps, about what wearable technologies are being used in dementia at the moment and what value are they adding?
Do you want me to take this first, Matt, and then?
Yeah, sorry, Reem.
So the wearable technology that I use specifically is just an accelerometer. We're now looking at accelerometers that have gyroscopes also inbuilt into them. And this is just a small sensor that we place on a person's lower back, and we ask them to wear it for 7 days. The brand of the accelerometer in this instance doesn't matter. What matters is that we can get the raw acceleration signal so that we can add our own bespoke algorithms to them. And I'm part of the Brain and Movement Research Group, who are conducting quite a large project to make open access algorithms for that purpose, for accelerometry. That's not the only wearable technology that's used. That's just what I use. There's other projects like the Radar AD project that are looking at commercial wearable technology like your Fitbit and so on, and trying to find out how that can be useful. The EDON initiative is obviously going to also have a look at similar kind of aspects of these commercial products. How can you use a commercial product and get it ready for a clinical purpose? The main thing that I think I've learned in terms of this, when we think about wearable technology and what choices we make, is how accurate the information can be from that. And so the reason that we look at the type of technology that I use and add these bespoke algorithms is because we can understand the raw data and adapt our algorithms, and we know exactly what we're getting. And I can't speak for how the commercial product designs work for that, but that's kind of the area that we're in at the moment.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Matt?
Yeah, and it's a very active question in my work at the moment, because we're trying to introduce a wearable device, a watch device, for some of our participants now. And the technology, the sensors in it can give us very valuable data, as Riona describes. The technology is there and it's affordable and it's useful. For me, the interesting question is how you introduce the watch to the person's daily life. I mean, if you don't usually habitually wear a watch and you start wearing one, or if you start wearing one on your other wrist as an experiment, it feels really odd for a while and it can feel quite uncomfortable. And if you take it off and you lose it, and if you're prone to wondering, all the effects, or some of the effects of dementia can make even little things like, wearing a watch quite a challenge, especially if you want people to wear it all the time. So we're looking at ways of how you introduce it gradually, for example, and making sure that the information on the watch face is understandable and meaningful to the person with dementia, because it might not be, it's alien. And if you're used to wearing a watch your whole life, you've got a bit of jewelry that is, was a wedding gift or is important to you, or, it can be linked to your sense of identity and your sense of self and your dignity. So even these small aspects of like, yes, we're going to get people to wear a watch and see what it tells us, that might be fine for a few days. We can learn some really valuable information. But if you want it to be more permanent, it's a nice illustration of where design aspects, human factors come in, and it's something that we're wrestling with, right at the moment. We're balancing the extra information you can have having a sensor on the body to the sort of more environmental passive approach of having sensors, on the walls or in the house, and actually the combination of the two is really promising and exciting because the watch can help identify which person you're tracking around the house or whatever you're trying to do. So yeah, really interesting question.
It's an interesting debate in our kind of field in working in dementia at the moment. There's so much excitement about the potential for new technologies. We did a podcast quite some time ago about how people were using their smart home devices to set alarms and reminders and plan days and things that people might forget. But at the same time, there's this real concern that people who are older, people who don't use much technology, might perhaps be left behind and not advantaged from be disadvantaged by some of these progressions. So it's an interesting area, and I think if you can use things that are already there, it's great. But there's so much potential for young people and undergraduates to bring their talents to this field. And looking at app developments, and I've seen great things used in virtual reality to look at spatial awareness considerations and things. That it's really exciting. We've got some more questions here which we'll come to. This is another question for no, this is a general question. Thank you, Raminda asks, thank you all for your very insightful talks. I have a question about how to approach potential PhD supervisors. I'd like to move abroad to Canada to study there, but I'm not sure how to go about approaching researchers. Do you have any thoughts? Sarah, do you get many people approaching you?
Yes, every week. and I like it. I think it's really great. And I think that's the way to do it. I think be specific about it. So do have a look around at what they actually do and pick the ones that you really find most interesting and that you think would be the good fit for you. Don't send 100 emails to just everyone with the same text copy pasted. But if you're specific about it and you can tell them in 1 or 2 sentences why you find their research exciting, you can put your CV in it or whatever. I love these emails. I definitely always get back. I often have a chat with these people on Zoom then and see whether they could do something in my lab or whether I can also recommend them some other labs that might be a better fit for them. So I absolutely think being proactive about that is a good thing.
I saw another talk as well where somebody talked about having more than one. Having already bagged one supervisor, quite often it's quite easy to use them as a hook to attract the second. So if you can get your main supervisor, perhaps, then you can approach somebody else to say, I'm already being supervised by this person, but I'm really interested in your work in here. Would they be willing to? Quite often people seem to be more willing to know that they are going to be a second supervisor rather than being wholly responsible. So if you make, perhaps say that you're open to the idea of having more than one, sometimes people might be more open to the idea of taking on extra supervision if they're not wholly taking on that responsibility themselves. And of course, making clear if you've also got funding.
Yeah.
Which makes it. Did anybody else have anything to add, Ree? Did you have anything? No.
Not really. I did, as we talked about earlier, I found my PhD on findaphd.com and went into a wholly made PhD that I was allowed to develop for myself, but I didn't have any experience with emailing supervisors beforehand. The only thing I would say, I guess, is just that if you are going into, say, a wholly made PhD, what I found was helpful, what my supervisors definitely said was helpful, was that I contacted them before I applied, and I asked them a lot of questions and asked them for recommendations of research papers to read. And I also stayed in contact with them from the time, like once I knew I was going to get an interview or after my application, I emailed them with my grades from my master's as I got them through and things. And they said that that was something that really put me on their radar for them, and that I stayed in contact.
In some survey work we've done recently, we discovered that quite often people didn't even go near Twitter until such time as they were getting toward the end of their masters. They were mostly in Instagram before that, and then you progress into Twitter as you professionally, perhaps even if not personally. But Twitter is a great place for this. So many academics have found Twitter and are tweeting and sharing their work by that method. So it is a great way to find people, to follow them for a while on there, see what kind of interest they've got, see what they talk about, as a way, as a door into that. So we've got another question from Suvik Dasgupta, who's asked, this is a technical one. Thank you for the presentation, Sarah. My question to you, as you said you developed a lot of statistical courses and materials, what's your take on the frequentist versus Bayesian debate, which is very popular these days? Would you say in your field of research, using one has a distinct benefit or disadvantage over the others?
So it's a big topic. I don't take sides on it. I think they are both useful within the right contexts. So put very simply, frequentist just means you do one experiment and you use a classical set of inference statistics to compare, say, group 1 and B, to compare the Alzheimer's brain.
Is that the official definition?
That's the official way. You compare the Alzheimer's brain against the control brain, and you don't use any other information on that. You just look at that experiment. Whereas Bayesian statistics sort of makes assumptions about prior distribution, so everything else you know beforehand about the question you're asking. And so it becomes really useful when you have multiple experiments, for example, or similar experiments that you try to integrate together and really generate more reproducible and robust knowledge, if that makes sense. So to me, we have so many novel technologies and we're profiling things for the first time. Their Bayesian doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because we shouldn't have a lot of assumptions about what we're going to see, because we're doing it for the first time. And there it could even be dangerous if you make the false assumptions beforehand. However, as you start to build up more and more scientific literature, more projects, more experiments, it's exactly the opposite. It's a wasted opportunity if you only look at each study individually and you don't try to integrate across modalities and across studies. And that's where the Bayesian statistics comes in as really useful.
Thank you very much. The same person actually asks also a question of you, Ree, which is, thanks for your presentation. My question is, as you do research in lower middle income countries, what are the challenges you might face in these countries? And do you collaborate a lot with research institutions or universities in other countries, or do you adopt different methods?
So I have to say that I started my research with the Global Health Research Group during the pandemic. So unfortunately, my placement has almost all been entirely remote. I've barely actually been in the same room as the people I work with that live in Newcastle themselves. So I'm not aware of things firsthand. I understand that some of the limitations that they have is, of course, there's language barriers, but I think they reach out to universities that they normally have a fairly well-established relationship with to create these big global health research programs. Some of the work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm helping with the qualitative aspect of the interviews that they're carrying out in these countries. I say helping loosely because I'm learning how to do qualitative research. So I'm really just offering some opinions and watching qualitative researchers do their work. And so some of the kind of interesting points I've picked up from there was that they've done it in the Global Health Research Group. They've done a very stringent training program for qualitative research. So it's, you know, it's people from those countries themselves that are going out and doing the qualitative interviews. They're doing them in their own language. So for example, they're doing them in Swahili in Tanzania, and then they're translating them back. The questions have been picked very carefully. So the questions were written in English, they were translated into Swahili, they were translated back to English. There was like 3 different translators that did that to make sure that it's all comparable to each other and still getting the sense of the message. And similar kind of practices then in the back translation for the interviews before they come back to the UK researchers. So that's been quite interesting. And then the other part of the research that I'm involved in with this is a systematic review looking at diagnostic tools for low to middle income countries, particularly instrumental activities of daily living scales. And that's been really interesting, I guess, from a research perspective as well, in that if we think that we're, you know, UK-based researchers are going to go into a low to middle income country and ask them a questionnaire, it's not necessarily going to be representative of their culture at all. And so we're trying to identify within the systematic review what are the best activity of daily living scales to use. And so, for example, an interesting point within that is that in some countries, you could just go in with our activity daily living scales that says, you know, can you dress, can you wash, can you go to the shops, can you do this? But in other countries, dressing might be a really higher cognitive problem, because you might have to put on a sari, which involves very complex kind of nodding systems. Or in other countries, older adults don't actually do much physical activities of daily living. That's not their role in society. Their role is a societal role. And so those kind of questions might more be framed around, can you take part in social events? Do you preside over traditional ceremonies? Do you help with your grandchildren? And that's the kind of questions you would have to ask to see if there's a cognitive impairment there. So I guess in terms of what I've learned from that in a research sense is that you have to be really careful about the cultural appropriateness of the activities or of the questionnaires or any of the assessments that you're going to use, and use them for that, and also explain your research really well to people as well, so they understand exactly the purpose of it and don't get confused about what you're trying to do for them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ree. Well, that's all of our questions. There is one that I think maybe just last question from me actually to Matt. Is there any particular way that somebody might get some work experience, for example, do you think, around kind of design work? Is there somewhere you might point them to? Because in other areas, when people this question has come up so far, so we've had some artists saying, how do they get to work with people with dementia? We've had people kind of working in labs and things saying, how do we get some lab experience? And whilst this question hasn't come up, I can't help but think that it might be one that people might think of when they're watching the recording back on YouTube. So how might people get some work experience on this, do you think?
Well, yes. So we do take the occasional work placement position within Helix Centre. We're not right now because we're just sort of cruising through the end, hopefully the end of lockdown, and we're all quite sort of. This year we've decided not to, but in general, you know, we do. And you know, if you're interested in healthcare and design or dementia design, then do get in touch, because there might be opportunities in the future. There is there is a really nice master's course between Imperial and RC and the Royal College of Art, centered around design and healthcare. So if you're inclined to think about that sort of 2-year postgraduate kind of course, it's a really nice combination. It brings clinicians together and it brings designers together, and they work on projects as part of the course together. So the idea is at the end we have healthcare professionals that are design savvy and designers that are really interested in healthcare. So that's something that I'd encourage you to look at. But you know, I think
that's great, because I think in MSc quite often you'll get to meet kind of places, and that they'll facilitate that as well, won't they, through those institutions, through the college. I'm not sure that's in our brand new higher education directory, so I will go away and try and find details out of that to make sure that's entered in. I think that's all of our questions. Penny, thank you very much.
Okay, so that just leaves it to me to wrap us up. So thank you everybody for your participation, particularly our three wonderful speakers who each were open enough to share their journeys, warts and all, because I do think that's a really helpful thing that we can be doing for people as they begin their journeys. This session has been recorded, so if anybody wants to watch it again or to recommend it to friends and colleagues, you can find the details on the Dementia Researcher website. I won't spell it out, it's in the chat already. Also, just to remind people that there's a social event this Friday at 4, where you can video chat with some of today's presenters and some other early career researchers who've been doing these on other days and come from other areas. You get a broader sense of other parts of the puzzle, I guess. And also other people who are at the same career stage as you are. I think any kind of networking, all kinds of networking has got to be useful. You just never know when those are going to pay dividends. So the more you can get out there and make connections, the better. But yes, just generally, thank you, Adam, for setting all of this up. You do an amazing job with the Dementia Researcher website of pulling together all the different people who are working in this area, whether that's charities or universities or other kind of centres, and I think it's a wonderful resource that you're providing for the whole world of dementia. So just with my Race Against Dementia hat on, just invite people to come and join the Race Against Dementia. I think together we can beat this, and we need to. Thank you, everybody.